toxicological testimony from Agency of Agriculture regarding PFAS. We really are here to focus in on the health effects of PFAS. So PFAS, as you...
Could you just, I'm sorry, could you just, for now that we're live, introduce yourself for the record?
Certainly, sure. Julia Rell, Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Health. And Andrea?
Andrea Kirk, State Toxicologist for Vermont.
Great, thank you.
So as you likely already know, PFAS are a very large group of human-made chemicals that have been and they still continue to be in use to make both household and commercial products. And they've been around since the 1950s and are still being produced and still used in production of different products. PFAS are found in people, fish, wildlife all over the world. And some of them do not break down easily, and therefore they stay in the environment for a very long time, especially in water. Some PFAS, like PFOA, bioaccumulate in human tissue and blood, and they stay in people's bodies for a long time. So it's important to try to keep them from entering our system. I'm sorry, was there a question?
I think we have a question back on the previous slide. Yeah.
Okay.
Just where it said some PFAS do not break down. I think when we've heard before that the carbon fluoride bond is one of the strongest and that none of them break down easily. Which is true? Some or all or most do not.
Andrea, I know that some have extremely long half-lives and others have much shorter half-lives, but Andrea?
Oh, yes, it's true that bond is extremely strong, but it can sometimes break into smaller fluorinated particles, molecules, excuse me, and so they break down, but they just may break down into another PFAS, basically.
Yeah, Representative O'Brien. Yeah.
Just quickly, when we're talking about the health effects of PFAS from sort of your point of view, I just wonder how big your universe is. Like you mentioned, people, fish, and wildlife. We even heard in plants that they're bioaccumulating. But are you mostly focused on PFAS and their effects on human health?
Yes, that's what we're focused on today is speaking to the human health effects of PFAS. Okay. So this is the meat of the matter. Exposure to PFAS may result in a wide range of health problems, including developmental effects that can happen both in utero and during postnatal development. Things like decreased birth weight, accelerated puberty, skeletal variations, development of the infant's immune system. There are cancers that are associated most closely, testicular and kidney cancers. Effects on liver and immune effects. So, for example, a decreased antibody response to vaccinations and a decreased immune response. Increased cholesterol or other cholesterol changes, preeclampsia or high blood pressure during pregnancy. And there's all new studies every year that show more emerging health effects, one of which is decreased bone mineral density. So as there are more studies done, our understanding of the dangers and the range of potential health effects grows. The risk of the health effects really depends on exposure factors and individual factors. Exposure factors being things like dose, frequency, and duration. And then the individual factors that can play into it can be things like sensitivity to exposure and their chronic disease burden. The bottom line is the lower your exposure to PFAS, the lower your risk of negative health effects. There are some populations that are especially sensitive to PFAS, and that is babies, children, people who are pregnant, and it can also, as I said earlier, impact fecal development. And the thing that is important to know about the impact on fetal development is that a single exposure during a critical period of development can then lead to lifelong chronic effects on that child. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a chronic or a high dose, but a single that single exposure at a critical period of development. So the bottom line is that it's important to help prevent PFAS from entering the environment. That's critical for protecting public health. They are, I'm sure you've heard them called forever chemicals, because once they're in the environment, once they're in the bodies, they're difficult to get out. Continued use of products that contain PFAS lead to more of those chemicals in our environment. So the more that they're produced, the more we use, the more it enters our environment. And the more that's in the environment, the more exposures and potential impacts on health. So approaches that prevent PFAS from entering the environment, like restricting PFAS in products, are critical to reducing exposures and to protecting public health. And that's it.
Thank you. Questions? I'm just curious, we did have, as I mentioned, some testimony on the different definitions of PFAS, and I think came away with the impression that the EPA's definition, which is results in there being many fewer PFAS chemicals, leaves out some that may be a concern, and I'm wondering just what your take is on that.
I'm going to defer to Andrea on this.
Right. It's just a very complicated question. And we're in discussion with, a number of national and state experts, but we're not ready to provide that definition today.
I think we really do, particularly for this, work really closely with our colleagues in the state to better build that definition.
So there's an existing definition in statute for products that have been banned, and for the purposes of what you've shared today, should we be thinking of that existing definition?
Yes, I mean the health effects that we spoke about today are sort of the PFAS writ large, and there may be slight variations, but in Vermont we have there are certain PFAS that are more common, like PFOA. And PFOS, and then a handful of others that are much more common to be found in Vermont than some of the others. And so that tends to be what at least the health department is focusing on, because that's really where we're more likely to see health impacts. So PFAS, PFOA, and PFOS tend to be the two big heavy hitters. Am I correct, Andrea, in terms of when we're talking about health impacts, it is often centered around those?
Yes, those are the most thoroughly researched, and they're also commonly found in Vermont.
And those are included in that definition
Yes.
within the state, with the state law.
Yeah. I'm wondering, can you tell us anything about sort of modes of ingestion?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we know a lot about drinking water. And we know that those two that you just mentioned are now the very low tolerance in our drinking water standards for taking in any of those. But we also know that there are other ways that they can get into the body, and perhaps it's other PFAS chemicals that are getting into the body through those other methods, and really just wondering whether we should be, would love your input on how concerned we should be, for example, on fluorinated packaging.
So, the most common way that the human body takes in PFAS is through water and contaminated food. And there are other ways, but it's not easily absorbed through the skin. So, really focusing on the most common ways is drinking water, contaminated food. So while the packaging, I can't really speak to the impact necessarily of the packaging itself. But when PFAS is used in the development of any product, whether it's packaging or food wrappers or whatever it may be, the development, the utilization of PFAS or the byproduct of PFAS through the manufacturing process, that's what then drives it into the environment. The breakdown of those, if it's on the inside of a pesticide container, the spraying of it, it can leach in and spray out and then gets into the groundwater. So it's not. It may not necessarily be the direct connection between the container and the human, but it's the breakdown and how it enters the environment. Am I saying that correctly, Andrea?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I think,
I always have to check in because I am not the toxicologist here.
Yeah. Okay. Representative O'Brien, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. One, in this committee, we were working on paraquat legislation earlier, and Parkinson's came up a lot. So I was thinking about neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, for example, that have exploded over the last 25 years. Is the medical research world looking perhaps at PFAS as, if not even directly causing those things, it is doing things to human, defenses, like you just mentioned, immunity, for example. I wonder if that may be essentially teeing up the human body for other things like an Alzheimer or Parkinson's. Have you seen any,
Andrea, are you familiar with research on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really good question, and I don't think the answer is known right now. I'm not aware of any research on that today, but it's an interesting thought.
My other thought was that we haven't talked in this committee about it, but we've been talking about the containers and just thinking in the larger sense of, say, HDPE plastics, which had a lot of PFAS in them, I understand, that what happens when those things are recycled? Are we keeping those forever plastics essentially just, recycling in our world and in our health?
I think the answer is probably yes, Andrea. Or I mean, I shouldn't guess because I think, I don't know the whole process of recycling and how they manage and work with the containers. So I don't know. Andrea, do you know if about the potential breakdown or release?
Yeah, I would have to guess. It's also not my direct field, but it would seem likely to me. And we can probably look into that and get back to you.
Yeah, no, I just thinking the irony of, say
right.
recycling number 2 milk jugs that then become playgrounds and park benches, et cetera. We're not getting rid of PFAS with recycling.
No, we're not getting rid of the PFAS easily.
Representative Bartholomew?
Toxicology is a pretty wide field. Andrea, can you just say briefly what your area of expertise is in toxicology? Might be good to capture that for the record.
Yeah. Most of my research has been focused on endocrine disruption and molecular interactions and pathways that lead to adverse outcomes.
So it sounds directly applicable to this.
Yes, a lot of developmental processes and disruption of processes.
And we've heard testimony about kind of differences between the longer chain and shorter chain PFAS chemicals. And in this presentation, they kind of all seem grouped together. So I'm wondering, do you know in terms of pesticides, some pesticides have PFAS as part of the pesticide. I'm not sure how persistent or whether those compounds are problematic for health effects. And then there's also pesticides that are contaminated from the container that has PFAS. So the kind of 2 different ways the PFAS can be in pesticides. Can you comment on the risk, maybe if you know, associated with those 2 scenarios?
I think it would be difficult for us to, we are certainly not experts in pesticides themselves and what the material, what's in the pesticides, what types of PFAS are.
We're not either.
I'm sorry, you aren't either.
We're not either, yeah.
And I think Pam Breyer did testify earlier. She would be much more familiar with this than we are. We're happy to get back, connect with Pam, get some additional information, and get back to you with additional information, unless you know off the top of your head, Andrea.
No, I would definitely ask Pam Breyer about this.
Thank you.
Richard?
Yeah. If they're taking plastic that was created with PFAS and recycling into park benches, as you said, a fairly durable product, would that be like storing carbon when you build a house? You talk about taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and forests are do a great job at it. And you cut down a tree and you make wood chips or firewood out of it, you're releasing the carbon back in the atmosphere. But if you make saw timber out of it and you're building homes or furniture and whatnot, you're storing that carbon. If they take that plastic and recycle it and make durable products out of it, wouldn't you be effectively storing that PFAS? Maybe be better off if we didn't have them, but would we be effectively storing them in a safer manner?
I think this also is going outside of our realm of knowledge. Andrea, I keep deferring to you.
Oh, yeah, like I'm a human health toxicologist. I think that's a really interesting question, but I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, these are fascinating questions.
The plastics break down to with UV and other stuff.
Yeah.
Just a definition follow-up. When you talked about contaminated fruit, for example, I was just thinking about, would you consider water contaminated too, if it's that level of how many PFAS per billion, say, or trillion are in, whether it's on the surface of an apple or in drinking water, like below that it's not contaminated and above that it is considered contaminated? Is that fair?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question. Is this
Okay.
related to like our regulatory levels in drinking water and whether it's considered contaminated or not based on those, or?
So you reference contaminant, if say fruits or vegetables are contaminated.
Yep.
Whether say they're either sprayed maybe at some level with a PFAS pesticide, or they pick it up somewhere else, say in leaching off packaging. And I didn't know if that meant that if you test, say, the skin of an apple, it has so many PFAS per billion or trillion, and that's what makes it contaminated, because it seems like there's PFAS in everything, and it's really a matter of how high the concentration is, and that's the line where contamination happens.
Well, I mean, I think that contamination is it can happen at any level. I think it's there are regulatory levels, and then there are health protective levels of things. The regulatory levels tend to be higher because it may be impossible to get things, or very difficult to get things below a certain level. And so that's why regulatory levels are set. And those regulatory levels have been coming down over time. So that those change. They don't just stay static. They change as more information comes and as the science improves about how to treat things and remove things. For health, we tend to be we set much more health protective levels because for some of the PFAS, almost any level can be harmful for some of them, and so we tend to work off of a thing called a hazard index. I don't want to go too far into that. That's down in the weeds. But it looks at all of the different types of PFAS that, at least here in Vermont, we may come into, and try to determine a level that you want to stay below this level in order to protect health. The long and the short of it is really the less you're exposed to it, the better off you are going to be at preventing health impacts from it. So we want to keep it as low as we can in order to protect human health. Very long way of saying that last sentence.
No, it sounds, going back to our baby food, it sounds similar to the sort of no lead in food, which we know we can't achieve, but we aspire to that.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of factors that come into play, but if you're looking at this purely from a public health perspective, the lower we can keep it, the less that people have that they're taking into their bodies, the better off for human health.
Let me just ask you this: when the legislature passed the bill last year phasing out in consumer packaging, fluorinated containers, did the health department testify, or either of you testify on that?
I'm going to have to, I think Jessica is in the room. I did not testify on it. Jessica, did the health department provide testimony on that?
For the record, Jessica Schifano, Policy Director, Department of, and Dr. Levine, the commissioner at the time, did provide very similar testimony to what you heard today, just about the general nature of the health impacts of PFAS.
Okay. So it wasn't specifically weighing in on
No.
whether fluorinated containers were a particular hazard. Good. Thank you. Any other questions? I did see something in the news a day or two ago about infant formula. Just while we have you here, what was that? Did the FDA come out with some research findings, maybe?
Oh, I actually don't know off the top of my head. I haven't seen what the
Something to
news
do with
report was.
Operation
Andrea,
Stork.
have you seen it? I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, they did. They released a lot of data on heavy metals and other contaminants, including PFAS, in baby food.
It seemed to be a positive news.
I
And-
haven't combed through the data, but yeah, I think it did look like the
That was the way
majority
that
is good.
this particular news story was presenting it anyway. So. Good. And the other thing I wanted to ask, which is while we had you here, and this may not be for either of you, Jessica may be able to help us. We had some rabies testimony from the agency a day or two ago, and they mentioned the airdrop vaccine program, which I know is a federal program, but the state cooperates with that. Is that something that either of you could speak to if we were interested in just hearing more about that program at some point?
I mean, certainly, although probably the best person would be our state veterinarian, Natalie Quitt. She works most closely with the federal government, and I think it's DEC maybe that all coordinate to do the rabies drop. But yes, we do that every year, usually a couple times a year.
Who does Natalie work for? The state veterinarian? Which department is she in?
She works up here at the health department.
Okay.
State veterinarian? What?
She is, yeah, she's a veterinarian.
Oh, but not the Agency of Ag State Veterinarian?
Yeah, different veterinarian.
Wow, that's
They're
confusing.
both state veterinarians.
Okay.
Both state veterinarians, yes. Ours focuses on the zoonotic, the health impacts of various, tick-borne rabies, all of that.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? Appreciate your taking the time this morning.
Thank you. You asked some really tough questions, really good ones. So we have our homework to do. Thank you so much for having us.
All right. Take care.
Great. Thank you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.
There's stuff on infant formula.
Formula.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. And just before we wrap up, we don't have any more testimony scheduled until I think 10:30, but if anybody has any reaction and want to have committee discussion, we can do that. Later today, we'll have Bradley in, and my question for the committee members will be, do we want to add this packaging to the existing language in statute? And Bradley will walk us through it. It's very straightforward, but that's basically what the question is going to be.
So we passed a bill banning PFAS, the family of PFAS, in retail containers.
It's
And this would expand that to pesticide containers that
yeah.
aren't considered retail.
So it's posted if you want to look at it, but it's fluorine treated containers. So not necessarily
What we
anything else,
passed,
just
right?
fluorine treated containers. Yeah. So it's not about whether there's PFAS in the material itself. It's just whether containers have been treated with fluorine.
Okay, right, like they get that coating.
Yeah, there's some kind of a process where they
Yeah.
remove the air and then they treat it with fluorine.
This is what we passed?
Yeah.
Okay.
So beginning in January 2032, the manufacturer shall not manufacture, sell, distribute, etc., a fluorine-treated container or any consumer product or pesticide in a fluorine-treated container.
I think we already,
That sounds like it covers it already, right?
Well, consumer products, adding or pesticide. So it's just right now, it's just consumer
Consumer.
product.
And
Like
like,
shampoo.
Shampoo or, yes, anything in a, so pesticide is not in the,
so certified applicators or private applicators aren't considered consumers.
yes, I think that's exactly the distinction.
Guess this would need to verify your product.
Yeah. So we'll have Bradley walk us through that and it'll be clear. And yeah, sorry, that was confusing the way I read it. I was reading the additional language that's not in statute.
Are there other fluorinated treated non-consumer things besides pesticide containers out there that might affect or we'd want it to affect?
We haven't heard any testimony and I don't know the answer to that.
Again, they could apply to this committee.
No. I guess if we specifically said the role is pesticide.
Yeah.
Since I've been in and out a bit, have we got any testimony from anyone on which brands of pesticides might have fluorinated containers? What the potential impact would be on
I don't think we have heard specifically
industry?
or if anybody knows that. Yeah, I don't think so.
That would be probably the main thing that I would want to hear testimony on.
what I,
Just to figure out, you know, I'd just be concerned that if we say Roundup only is available, like say it was only available in fluorinated containers.
Yeah.
What happens if we put in a law that says
so,
they can't, that it's banned in our state? And they're like, well, we don't feel like trying to have different containers specifically for Vermont.
Mhm.
I don't know.
so FIPRA says back up here that, and those slides we got from Dr. Breyer has a thing on container fluorination. But FIFRA said that pesticides cannot be changed on how their, FIFRA prohibits PFAS contamination in pesticides. So when they formulate a pesticide, they test it. It can't change from there.
By the time it comes out and
And
applied.
that time it comes out and it's applied. That's how I understand it. We could ask,
It can't change, but we've heard it does turn at some level into TFAs and other things, right?
what's that?
We have heard when it breaks down, it does change though, right?
Well, FIFRA prohibits PFAS contamination. Plain and simple. And then down at the end of Dr. Breyer's slides, it said, shows sources of PFAS. And there are very few that are lower than pesticide contamination. Pesticide, fertilizer, and other agricultural chemical manufacturing surface active agents, it says. That there are several that are way above it. You know, industrial gas manufacturing are way above it. Electrical equipment, appliances, component manufacturing are 42. The agriculture is 0.001. I mean, it's, you know,
But we've certainly heard they exist in pesticides both as an active ingredient and they're and they also leach out of the containers at times.
And again, FIPRA says there will be no PFAS contamination.
And that's what I wondered about the contamination definition.
And, we could ask Dr. Breyer again, but it's,
Dave, on Greg's question, are like the whole aisle at Bobashan, that's Scott's weed killer, right, to say, are those things gonna be affected by the existing law we passed? Or
Yeah.
because they're pesticides, they're not considered consumer
No, I
items
think they are considered consumer products if they're available in a,
over the counter.
if they're sold to consumers at retail. And we can get the definition of that from the Ledge Council. But I think so. That's my understanding.
Do you buy glyphosate from your pesticide dealers?
I get in a 250-gallon tote. And when
That may fall into a different category.
Consumer product.
and well, you could buy it. You absolutely can buy that same tote.
Because that's not a restricted.
It's not, it's restricted, but not so restricted.
Right.
And that tote, when I'm done with it, gets triple rinsed. And that rinse water is put through my machine, my last load. And that tote goes back to where I bought it and they refill it.
What does a tote look like?
It's those plastic squares, with a cage around them
Uh-huh.
and the big lid on top. Yeah.
Jack uses it for sap.
Yes.
Yeah, guys like Jack come to the farm and say, you got any toads? Oh, we got ones out from formaldehyde. Okay, I'll rinse it out next to the brook. And we'll use it to store sap in it.
They're anywhere, those things.
Make beer. All right.
Not
Everybody knows when we're being serious. And
as
I don't have any, so.
Dr. Breyer said, there's so many heavier lifts than pesticides. And, when we talked about, remember, last year, Commissioner Gwinnell said, there's pesticides in your sneakers. They spray fungicide in your sneakers, and, it's just that, unfortunately it's out there, but they found some in pesticides, they removed those products or reformulated it to remove it years ago.
we heard that they were treated articles, weren't sneakers considered treated
Right,
articles?
Yeah,
And mix, yeah.
Yeah.
But interesting, what we just heard from, Department of Health is that their job is never gonna be done of like, we aspire to essentially get PFAS out of our world, and it seems to be so pervasive, it's going, and because they're forever. That's uphill battle.
Obviously, the real answer is to make it legal to produce PFAS in the first place and incorporate it into, processing. And then we need incinerators on the other end that can actually get hot enough to break it down. That's really, that's, if you're you stop manufacturing it and you burn it up as it goes through the waste stream. That's, to me, the answer to how you actually reduce the levels in our environment.
Yeah.
Just let it happen through the waste stream, you make electricity, and you break down molecules somewhere off the coast of Michigan.
2,500 degrees.
And then seal the ashes in a concrete block and drop it down the ocean.
Yeah, no, you take them to Coventry.
Bring them up to your house.
Yeah, and if Casella does it, I will.
Representative Bartholomew has his hand up.
I mean, this is just an area where I get so frustrated where public health comes to at odds against the chemical industry and the petroleum industry. Because a company will make a container cheapest way they can to contain it. And so rather than come up with a container that doesn't cause poisoning, they treat the plastic container to make it work and still keep it cheap. There are alternatives for storing pesticides that aren't in plastic bottles. But so we're just exposed to these, and I just find it so frustrating that for economic reasons, we're exposed to these poisons and we keep doing it. I'm done. Just expressing my frustration.
Well, it would have to be a total industry change for it to work without having detrimental effect on people in Vermont. And if they, I don't know how many other states are going with the packaging, in 32. And if there's a whole bunch of states, they will change. If California changes like we did with infant formula, if California goes, the industry goes.
I agree with you. Yeah, you're right.
And
If we were gonna do something, it might be another one where we say, like we did on the formula. If California is willing to do it, then so are we.
there may be, the consumer packaging is a lot more pervasive than the agricultural packaging. It's on a, the amount of plastic I generate to cover 2,700 acres pales into comparison on what's on the shelf in one row at Shaw's. It really does. It really does. And you take what I generate, what agriculture. And this is, we're talking pesticides, we're not talking just agriculture, we're talking, the whole gamut.
Yeah.
Flea and tick and fly spray and hot wasp and hornet killer and stuff, which tend to be in metal containers because they're under pressure. You can spray them at distance. And they worked, FIFRA, the EPA heard the message and they've been scaling back the PFAS in the ingredients. But and it says right here, there will be no contamination. It comes out the way it went in. That's how I read that.
Well, you have protocols too for disposal or reuse.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Which we certainly don't.
Right.
Absolutely.
Around that world,
Yeah, and we have protocols, but who knows what actually happens.
Yeah.
Why don't we hear from John and then I think we can take a break.
Just going to comment on what's different in agricultural use is if you have a container and you're throwing away the container, there aren't many containers, but if you have contaminated product from the container in agricultural use, you could be sending it on thousands, how many acres of farmland across the country. Whereas if you're, putting it in your dog to control flea and tick, that's pretty small acreage compared to agricultural use. Because it's just spread across fields.
All right, thanks everybody for that. We'll continue the
one-
conversation.
One thought on other legislation, and I don't know if it's in what we already did, but to have the packaging industry almost show that there's not, an alternative that's within sort of economic
Yeah.
reasonability would be
Yeah.
interesting, that they sort of have to prove that, within 20% more, they can't create a safer
Yeah.
container. Would be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the incentive for any corporation, which it is to maximize profit, and that's, yeah, so they're always going to do what John
Right.
suggested, because that's the way our
Metal's the
system works.
obvious-
Yeah, but one
obvious
thing,
choice, but it's more expensive. It's much more recyclable, it's more expensive, it's corrosive, and it's heavier to ship. Plastic's cheaper. Let's use that.
So I will go back to part of what I brought up yesterday. When this affects food production in the country, it affects cost per acre. No one seems to want to pay that extra cost. No one. And I don't care if you're in my world, Greg's world, or the organic world. You know, we have people coming through this room all the time looking for aids for people to buy food. You know, Crop Cash Plus, the food shelf, everywhere, helping people buy food. And in my world, people say you dairy farmers are subsidized. Boy, not much, because we're all losing money. And if we were truly subsidized, we wouldn't be losing money, but we're all losing money. And when you hear people come in here, if you took away everything, you took away Crop Cash Plus, you took away the food shelf, you took away everything, how many farmers would be left? Who could afford to buy food? You know,
We had, Bill Driscoll testified earlier on this bill. Maybe we can reach out again. Could speak to questions that Greg had.
like, actually, an example, right, would be catalytic converters, like. Nobody in the automotive world would have voluntarily done that.
Right.
But when government says you need them, right, it made cars more expensive and
Yeah.
et cetera, but it was like, we could do the same thing.
Yeah.
With containers.
See, the thing is though, that happened at a federal, like it wasn't Vermont
Right, no.
that said you have to have a catalytic converter. But that probably would have worked because people have to have vehicles, right? But when you have something like baby formula, where, I mean, even that, we have to have baby formula. But when you have a couple side, you know, say it's, an insecticide that's used by, whether it's apple growers or dairy farmers, in the case of, you get corn, or I don't know, what kind of insecticide might you put on your corn in a year when you have insecticide, it's insect pressure?
yeah, Nick and Orange, yeah. Grizzly is a spray that you can put on. And it comes in a 2.5 gallon container. And you mix that into your big sprayer, your 90-foot booms, and you cover every square inch of the ground. And it is an indiscriminate killer. And but it'll stop corn borer dead in its tracks, just stops it. If you got corn plants falling over and you go out and spray a field of Grizzly, the next day you have no more corn plants falling over.
Let's say that one was a fluorinated container by chance, because we just don't know. And that company said we can't supply it to Vermont anymore. But, Vermont doesn't buy enough of that for us to put it in a different bottle online. I don't, they're little things that all of a sudden, well, there's 10 more dairy farms that decided to go up for sale because their corn crop was devastated and they didn't have the insecticide available to stop it because of a law that wasn't.
Or the cost of production just went up 10%. No one's gonna pick up the difference.
So I don't know, that's
Yep,
the thing I need.
those are the fundamental challenges here. Yeah.